We will now call the January 27th special call meeting to order. Chairman Morgan is unable to attend as she's attending a funeral of a family member. We will have the clerk call roll.
Vice Chairman McClendon.
Present.
Commissioner Chance.
Here.
Commissioner Lee.
Here.
Commissioner Fuller.
Here.
Commissioner Reynolds.
Here.
Commissioner Chambers.
Here. Thank you. We will have our invocation by Commissioner Reynolds, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance by Commissioner Fuller.
Our Father, we thank you for our nation and our great state, and for this county and the communities that we serve. And we pray always for your guidance, that we would know how to deliberate and how to make decisions that are wise and best for all. And we thank you for your spirit of love, and we pray that as this nation and all of us need more of it, that you could pour it in and we could in turn pour it out in love for one another. We pray for your guidance today and help us each day. In Jesus' name we ask. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, gentlemen. Do I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda for this special call meeting?
Motion.
Second.
All in favor? All opposed?
Approved 6-0.
All right. Do I have a motion to approve the executive session meeting minutes from December 7th, 2021? All in favor?
Motion approved.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you, sir.
Approved 6-0.
All right, we will now move into our financial session. We have a consideration for 2022 qualification fees. Attorney Black is going to come up and give us some information on that.
Thank you, Commissioners. We have a proposed resolution to set and publish the qualifying fees for the upcoming year, and you can see those offices are for the District Commissioner of $260.96 and for the school board, county school board seats for $50 for the qualifying fees.
Is there any discussion? All right, do I have a motion to approve the fees as presented?
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Approved 6-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Do I have a motion and a second to adjourn the special call meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Meeting adjourned.
Good job.
All right, we're going to move into our regularly scheduled work session here. So I'm now going to call the January 27, 2022 work session to order. I call on County Attorney Avery Jackson and Human Resource Director Ann Lee to present about the early retiree health insurance coverage plan.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. A while back at a retreat, we discussed a potential plan for the county to look into the possibility of providing health insurance for early retirees and how that might help out some departments, particularly the public safety areas and departments. But essentially, the plan, and you have some notes before you of kind of a basic outline of a proposed plan for your discussion and consideration. But the plan would be that employees that reach the age of 62 and that have been with the county for 20 years and who are fully retired the county could provide them gap insurance until Medicaid, Medicare kicks in at above the age of 65. And like I said, we thought that might be an incentive for employees, long-term employees who work with the county. Also, it would help those employees, again, in those real demanding areas of public safety who have been with the county for a number of years and may not can continue to perform the demanding job duties that they've been doing for the county for the 20 years before potential early retirement. But what we did is, after discussing it at the work session and thinking that there was some interest, but that we needed to look into and see what would be the potential cost of that, we dug into the numbers a little bit further and wanted to just go over some of those with you. That it appears that, I know Ms. Lee in her office looked into it on all of our employees, what would be the potential number of employees that could partake in this potential benefit. And that was about 37 employees on average up until, say, year 2034, I think is as far as they looked out to. But average of 37, a potential max of 46, but based on kind of employee surveys that were taken, we would estimate that between 5 or 6 people would be on the plan a year. So we're not talking about a huge number. Again, there's a lot of factors that might go into that for an employee, whether they want to do that or not, how much they've saved for retirement, their family factors, other factors are involved. So based on the discussions with employees, surveys that were taken, we would estimate potentially that 5 to 6. And so for the cost and budgeting, if employees separate from the county or retired early now, they could continue COBRA insurance for a number of months. And the COBRA premium payments, which are before you kind of took an average of the COBRA premium payments per employee and came up with a number about $12,000 per employee. And we estimated 5 or 6 would take us up on it, but to just be conservative, we wanted to budget for around 10 employees. And so the estimated cost would be $120,000. So if this was something that interests the commission, then what we would do is Ms. Lee would include this potential option in the county's health insurance renewal, which we renew every year. Again, our year starts on July 1st. So when she goes out to renew the health insurance, as she normally does, she would include this as a piece of that insurance, which we would then bring to you as the total package health coverage in the renewal. And we would also include that in the budget, the new budget for starting January 1, if there's a consensus to proceed and if this is something that the county would be interested in doing, and then the board could actually vote on it as part of the budget and part of the renewal for the health insurance. Any questions or concerns? Or
Mr. Jackson, I spoke with you briefly about this yesterday, was also able to speak with Ms. Lee. Starting off, I really like the parameters that they had to have worked for the county for 20 years, so that prevents someone from coming in the last couple of years and then taking advantage of this. A couple of concerns that I had, one is, I guess in the presented language, there's the, essentially it's stating that the current plan that they're in is one that they could go out and get for free if they retired early. And so some of my thought processes there are, we have currently a $1,500 deductible and a $2,500 deductible. So for me, if we're going to be providing that absolutely free of charge, I'm wondering if we shouldn't consider maybe that higher deductible. Instead of currently, you would have employees paying for the $1,500 deductible, and then they could go out and retire and keep that same plan and pay absolutely nothing. I don't know if that would necessarily be considered fair. I think that might be something we could look at.
I think that's a good point, and I did discuss this with Ms. Lee, and what we thought is, and I think our understanding from our brokers is that we'd probably have to offer the same insurance plans that we offer to our current employees, but to the extent that our current employees do pay some monthly amount to get the lower deductible plan, that an early retiree under the same insurance coverage would have to pay that same amount. Basically, whatever our current employees are being offered, and again, that changes year to year based on our renewals, so just because somebody retires 1 year doesn't mean they'll keep that same insurance coverage or plan throughout their early retirement period of the 5 to 7 years. But what we would do is that if an early retiree wanted that lower deductible plan, they have to pay the same amount that an employee would have to pay for that plan. So instead of the county providing for free, it's basically the county offering the same insurance coverage that it offers its same employees at the same rates.
My only other thought on looking through the information is essentially if you retired at 62, and I don't think we're advocating for people to go home and do nothing, but in the same note, if someone is in very good health and retired early at 62 and went to work for another company, I know the current language states that if they provide insurance, then they would be required to take that insurance. But my concerns are if you go to a company that's not providing insurance and they're willing to pay bigger bucks because they know they don't have to absorb that employer cost, and they're retiring with us at 62 and going and making $50,000 or $60,000, assuming they're in good health, I would have a little bit of hesitation about us providing something absolutely free. I don't know if we need to look at a monetary number, or if we look at the way Social Security is set up. I don't know what parameters that would look like, but just to leave it completely open-ended that they could go somewhere, it's almost like we would be incentivizing other companies not to provide any insurance at all if they were making that kind of money. And 62 years old is no longer 90. I mean, there's a lot of people that are still very active at 62. So I want to promote our employees. I definitely want to see them, if they've worked with us for 20 years, give them something they can be proud of. But in the same note, we are expending taxpayer dollars, and I would like to see some type of stipulation. I don't know what that would look like, but I just wouldn't want to see it completely open-ended.
That's a very good point, Commissioner, that we don't want it to be the early employee transfer program where they transfer to somewhere else and take part in our benefits. But I think that we could include the stipulation in there that they are retired. They're not accepting other full-time employment. Now, maybe they have a part-time job or something in their retirement, like many retirees do, and that would be fine, and we'd still provide them the health insurance. But if they're working full-time for somebody else, then they can get their own benefits and health insurance. They're not a retiree. They just move to a different job at that point. So I think that's a good point, and I think we could put that in there, that they are early retirees, and we define early retirees as somebody who actually is retired and not accepting full-time job at another employment.
Thank you, and thank you to Ms. Lee for all your research and putting the program together for our review. Thank you for your work.
Did you have anything else to add?
I have a couple questions just to clarify. We had the same type of thing with the state, and I know there's been a lot of discussion behind the scenes, so I won't beleaguer the point. But I think this is very good, as I know my fellow commissioners do. But I am glad that we're now potentially offering something so that our employees aren't hung out to dry, if you will, if they retire before they're eligible for Medicare coverage. I did the same thing, and I appreciated that opportunity with the state. I just wanted to ensure that I understood this right. The $120,000 cost to the county that you mentioned, Avery, that's for all 37 to 46, or is that just the 5 to 6?
That would be, so again, we estimate that 5 to 6 would take us up on it, and the $120,000 would be based on 10 people. That would be based on $12,000 per employee, which would be their COBRA premium that employee would have to pay to continue their insurance where they separated from the county. So that would be that expense, and that's what we kind of based it off of, but we wanted to be conservative, and certainly we'll have to see how how the proposal takes shape and how many people start taking us up on it and things
Yeah.
like that.
And in coming up with that average, I don't know, like when something like this is offered, as Commissioner Chance alluded to, did we consider that there may be more than we might anticipate that would take us up on that? In other words, is that average of 5 or 6 accurate, or given the incentivization of this, might there be more?
Ms. Lee's office contacted potentially eligible employees were the plan to be enacted and kind of surveyed them to see who would be interested or could be interested. And again, financial consideration is part of that too, whether the employees are financially able to retire at that time or not, and Social Security, whether they can take early Social Security, various other factors. But it is based on actual responses from employees that were surveyed, contacted in person, and discussed the potential plan. And again, you're absolutely right. I mean, they may say one thing now and decide something later, but that's about the best we could do, was actually discuss it with the employees and see what their thoughts were.
Yeah, okay. And if I understood the last point correctly, between the 1,500 and 2,500 deductible plans, then we would have potentially, or we're thinking about 2 different type of costs, is that right? Or premiums for the...
I think that's right, and Ann can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I believe now that if an employee chooses the 1,500 deductible versus the 2,500 deductible, that employee is paying $100, if they're on the wellness program, or if they're not participating in the wellness program, $150 a month for that lower deductible. So the employee is getting charged some money for the different plan. And yes, whatever, and again, plans change year to year, and all those factors change, but the early retirees would be offered the same plans that are offered to current employees at the same prices. So if an employees are able to choose a different plan, but it costs them $150 a month to choose that plan, then the early retiree would have to pay that same amount to get that same plan or deductible.
Okay, good. Well, I according to these figures, it makes a lot of sense for employees, and I like to see that the county is saving them basically compared to COBRA, $550 to $650 a month, which is a great program. So good.
Any other questions or thoughts? Thank y'all very much.
Thank you, guys. All right, I now call on Clay Pilgrim and Julie George with Rushton and Company to present our audit.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Julie George with Rushton and Company, and also here with me today is Clay Pilgrim, audit partner, and we're here today to present the audit report for the fiscal year end 6/30/21. So just to bring to your attention what you should have a bound presentation. That's what we're going to spend most of our time in, a bound report that will give you some good reading after the meeting, and a couple of letters. So let's just start on page 2. Two buttons. I first want to say thank you to the Board of Commissioners for engaging Rushton to perform the audit this year. We certainly appreciate you guys and enjoy working with the board and all of your employees. And I would also like to thank Commissioner Morgan, Alicia Searcy, and the Finance Department. They are very responsive and attentive to our needs, and we certainly appreciate, certainly couldn't do what we do without them. So we certainly want to say how much we appreciate that. And all the other employees we work with as well. I mean, we obviously visit the tax commissioner's office and the sheriff's office and some of the courts and other departments, and they all, again, are attentive to our questions, take the procedures seriously, and try to be as prepared as they can for when we come. So we appreciate all of those who work with us. We're going to start with the audit opinion. So If you're looking at the bound report, it's pages 1 through 3. There's a few things in that opinion letter that I would like to point out. One is that these financial statements are the responsibility of the county's management. And to mention what our responsibility is, you'll notice in that third paragraph, as your independent auditors, our responsibility is to express opinions on the fair presentation of the financial statements. Also included in the letter, it does explain what auditing standards and the county's financial statements are performed in accordance with auditing standards generally accepted in the United States of America, and also in accordance with government auditing standards, which are issued by the Comptroller General of the United States. Looking over on page 2, you'll see the very first paragraph is the opinion paragraph. This is an unmodified opinion. That means we did not need to make any modifications to the standard auditor's report. And you'll see it reads, in our opinion, the financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of Carroll County, Georgia, as of 6/30/21, and the respective changes in financial position and, where applicable, cash flows for the year that ended. You probably have heard that referenced to as a clean opinion. That means there's no modifications, and we do believe, based on our audit, that these financial statements are fairly presented. It's definitely the kind of opinion you would be looking for. Moving on over to slide 3, we're going to start with the government-wide financial statements. There are 2 financial statements. They're based on the full accrual basis of accounting, and they present all activities of the county. So we have governmental activities, which would include all of your funds combined, with the exception of the solid waste fund. And then the business type activities is your solid waste fund. And then we, of course, have a column for your component units, and those are combined here. There is detail for each component unit on another statement within here. So first, on pages 12 and 13, we have the statement of net position. Presents your assets, deferred outflows of resources, liabilities, and deferred inflows of resources, as well as your residual net position. And we're going to look at where that net position is in next slide. But first, I want to point out the statement of activities on page 14. And this is the results of the county's operations for the year. So this is where you're going to see your revenues, your expenses for the entire county combined, as well as the component units. Okay, so moving to slide 4, we've got a table here of the county's net position for the last fiscal year, last 5 fiscal years. So we're going back to 2017. For 6/30/21, the county did see an increase in total net position over the prior year of $17 million. And you'll notice that that is separated between 3 different types. The net investment in capital assets of $108 million, that is the county's capital assets, buildings, equipment, land, infrastructure, less the depreciation to date of 6/30/21 on those assets, less any debt that is used to purchase those assets. Then you have your restricted net position coming in at $23 million. It's going to be your restricted funds, such as your unspent LMIG, your SPLOST is going to be a large part of that. And then we've got our unrestricted, which is $31 million. It's an increase of over $10 million over a prior year, and that part is not restricted. And that's just a very good place to be, to have that much available in unrestricted and to see such an increase over a prior year. So we're going to move to fund level statements and spend some time on the general fund. The general fund, of course, is the county's primary operating fund, and we definitely want to spend some time there. So I am going to flip over to page 88. The general fund has several comparative statements on pages 88 through 95. We've got a comparative balance sheet, schedule of revenues, expenditures, and those have prior year numbers as well as the final budget. So if you really want to dig into the general fund, this is where you would want to go. But for the sake of time, I've got a few graphs on the general fund. The first one being the revenues and expenditures over the last 5 years. One thing I want to point out, the blue are the revenues, the green are the expenses, and over the last 5 years, the revenues have exceeded the expenditures. And in addition to that, they have increased steadily each year. And you'll see that from FY20 to FY21, we've got about a $10 million increase in expenditures. The schedule of revenues is on page 90. So this is where you'll see the detail of the $67 million in revenues. And it's broken down by revenue type. And again, we've got the prior year and the final budget as well. Expenditures, total general fund expenditures for FY21 is the $55 million. The schedule of expenditures, 91 through 95. And again, that's going to be broken down by the county's functions and departments with a final budget column as well as a variance column, and also prior year. And expenses did increase. I think we all know expenditures are increasing currently, but they increased much less than the revenues did. So it's went from 51.9 to 55.2, and we saw a much greater increase in revenues. So now let's go to the next slide and look at what does that do to our fund balance. Obviously, if we had more revenues than expenditures, we expect to see fund balance climb. And this graph shows both total and unassigned fund balance. And you'll see over the last 5 years that has increased each year. The unassigned and the total have both increased. And just over prior year, it increased $9.5 million. And one thing that we talk about in our presentations with you each year is how many months of reserves would that be? And I calculated that using the unassigned only and using current year expenditures and calculated 5.7 months. So that would mean as of 6/30/21, if revenues had stopped coming in, the county had enough unassigned fund balance to operate at that same level of expenditures as FY21 for 5.7 months. And that's a very healthy fund balance, and I've been here when we didn't really want to talk about what kind of fund balance, there was many years ago. I know Commissioner Chambers probably remembers those days, and I live here, and I'm very pleased to see where the county is.
I remember when we didn't want to see you coming.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide and look at where our revenues are coming from in the general fund. Got a pie chart here, and as you would expect with the county government, property taxes are 44% of the county's revenues. So a little less than half, with sales tax coming in at 20% as the next largest chunk of the pie. But you'll also see here, the various colors in the chart represent that the county does have various sources of revenues. We're not looking at a pie chart that's all gray with property taxes. We're seeing property taxes, local option sales taxes, charge for services, insurance premium tax. So we are seeing a variety of revenues. Moving on to slide 8, we have the general fund expenditures by function. And again, the numbers here come from pages 91 through 95. And as you would expect, and as you usually see for Carroll County and also for other local governments, public safety is a large chunk of the general fund expenditures, coming in at 52%, with public works at a very close to judicial as being second and third. Public works at 14%, with judicial at 7%. And as you're aware, counties operate a lot of courts, and there's a cost in doing so. And as a result, judicial is a good bit of the pie, and general government at 13%. So that's where our expenses are. And again, pages 91 through 95. Okay, moving on to slide 9. I mentioned earlier in the presentation that we also performed this audit in accordance with government auditing standards. So on pages 143 and 144, we have a report that, we are required to issue. And I just wanted to point that out. We basically are issuing a report, not providing an opinion on your internal control, but letting you know the scope of our testing of internal control and compliance, what our results were, and letting you know of anything that came to our attention during testing. And as you'll see at the bottom of page 143, we did note some significant deficiencies, and those are listed on page 150 and 151. And this year, the county was required to have what we call a single audit. That means the county expended more than $750,000 in federal awards. And that requires the report that you see on pages 145 and 146. We performed the audit in accordance with the uniform guidance for the federal awards, and we issued this report where we considered the county's compliance with the requirements that are applicable to each major program that we tested and the internal control over that compliance. This report, again, describes the scope of our testing. It does give an opinion on the compliance with the requirements. That opinion is unmodified, but it is not intended to provide an opinion on internal control. I want to spend just a few moments talking about some changes that you'll see in the report this year. We assisted the county with implementation of GASB 84 fiduciary activities this year, and those statements are on page 27 and 28, but we're going to look at the ones on page 139 through 142. This statement established guidance to identify what fiduciary activities the county has, and also changed how they are reported. It provided a different financial reporting model. And I want us to look at those statements on 139. And basically this impacted the county's custodial funds. If you look here, you'll see it was the courts, the sheriff's office, the tax commissioner. And in the past, these funds have had assets and liabilities only. And now they have assets, liabilities, and net position based on how defined in GASB 84. And also, looking at page 141 and 142, in the past we've had receipts and disbursements from these funds, and now we have additions, deductions, which are in much more detail than they have been in the past, and also coming down to the change in net position. So, that is something that there's a lot more detail there, and again, there is net position now, whereas usually in the past, those just zeroed out. You had assets, you had liabilities. Okay. Moving on to slide 12, we've got a future reporting change. So we have a really big one coming up. I feel like we've been taking CPE classes on this one for years. And it's time to implement it now. So we have already discussed this with Alicia and the finance department. We've provided a couple of spreadsheet tools and given her some guidance and direction, because it is time to start preparing for this standard now. This is not something that we can wait until fiscal year end or audit time to do, and it's not something that the finance department can wait on either. So we are already working on this with the finance department, and we'll be in touch with Alicia over the next few months to try to make sure we all stay ahead of this standard, because we do anticipate it to be very significant for the county. It is going to change the way that the county accounts for any leases. And all governments, have to implement it. And and you're going to be implementing it June 30, 2022. And that slide's been in the presentation for a few years at least, so we've been planning for it for quite some time. I want to refer to just a couple of the letters that you have, explain what you've got. You have two letters. The first one that I'm going to address, they don't have titles, but the first one has significant audit matters underlined. This is a letter that contains certain required communications that we need to make to you according to our professional standards. It describes to you sensitive estimates, sensitive disclosures that are included in the financial statements, and it also lets you know that we didn't encounter any difficulties or disagreements in performing our audit. The other letter is what we refer to as a management points letter. It contains the same 3 deficiencies that I mentioned from the earlier report, but it also contains 4 additional recommendations. And I do know that we have spoken with Commissioner Morgan and the Finance Department, and they are already looking at those to see where they can improve. And those are not significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, so therefore not in the other report, but they are opportunities to gain some efficiencies and strengthen their internal controls. That's a lot of information. Are there any questions? Anything you want to talk about more?
Ms. George, thank you for the presentation. I do have a question.
Okay.
We get comments from time to time or questions that talk about our reserve fund. And I know that you had spoken with us in a work retreat before, and there are some general guidelines out there that ACCG provides. Sometimes it may, suggest 3 to 4 months worth of reserve. But one thing that you explained to me is a lot of times, one county could have 3 months reserve, another county could have a full year's reserve. That doesn't mean that one necessarily has too much and one has too little, because you explained about the operations of the county. So I guess as a fiscal conservative, you also want to make sure we don't have so much that we shouldn't give some of that back. But from an auditing perspective, and you correct me if I'm wrong because I'm asking the question, but based off the past information you've given me, even though our fund balance has increased significantly, that doesn't necessarily mean we have too much per se when you're trying to look at the total county operations and trying to understand maybe where that number should fall in line.
I don't think so. Based on the county's operations, that is too much. I would not think most governments would look at giving some back at that level. I think GFOA recommends a minimum of 2 months. Personally, I think that's low. I'd rather have 4 to 6. But there's a lot of factors. I mean, you can't take 2 county governments similar size without looking at other factors. Debt is a factor. Obviously, if a county and you don't, but if a county, you have debt, but you don't have a very high level of debt. But if a county had a lot of debt that it needed to pay from its general fund, those debt payments, they're always there. They're there till it's paid off. So I think that's a consideration. I think how volatile are your revenues is a consideration. How volatile are your expenses? I mean, there's just a lot of things to look at. Where does our fund balance need to be? 6 months may not be enough for everybody. It usually is. But, 3 months may not be enough for everybody. But most people kind of just look at it like, could we make it until taxes come in again? And being a June 30th year in, I think 6 months is a good number, because it is, if it had to, it could get you to property tax collections, insurance premium tax, some of those larger revenues that you see in the fall.
Thank you.
Couple questions.
Sure.
So I guess with that amount of cash reserve, whatever, we're in a good position, not only cash-wise, but as far as bond ratings and that kind of thing, pretty favorable, correct?
Yes, I have not seen the latest one. I don't think Alicia may have, but the bond ratings for the county have been very good. It hadn't changed? Okay.
the cash reserve numbers in your charts that show cash versus expenditures, and I didn't see listed in the detail where that includes any of the federal money that we receive through, like the COVID federal, that may have come in afterwards.
Okay.
Is that-
Well, let me flip over to the general fund revenues and explain where that is.
Okay.
On page 90, if you look at the intergovernmental of 5 million, that includes CARES, because
Okay.
CARES was recognized in FY '21. It does not include the ARPA funding, because although the ARPA funding is in cash, it was unearned, so we've not recognized it as revenue yet. It is going to be recognized either when it's expended or according to the final ruling that was issued recently.
You said that falls under the intergovernmental line?
Yes, CARES is included. The CARES funding is included in the intergovernmental line of the 5 million, but the ARPA is not recognized here. If you look over 124, that's what I was looking for, the correct page. If you look over on 124, we've got the American Rescue Plan Fund, and you'll see that the 11 million ARPA funds is here, and that is currently unearned. So that's not even in the general fund. When we're talking about reserves, ARPA's not considered in those numbers we discussed at all. It's in its own fund. It is in the net position, or actually it wouldn't be because it's unearned. It would net to a zero, but it is in that governmental activity statement, but not in the general fund.
Okay.
Any questions about ARPA? A lot of money. And,
So basically, the ARPA would only make it better as far as our cash position.
for the general fund, no impact, but as a total county
Yeah.
cash position, yes.
Okay. As far as the internal controls, I was just interested, I've lost the page now, but,
Sure.
so, on page 139, I guess, but as far as the second finding that you have, I think this is pretty much an ongoing finding, if I remember correctly.
It is. That's the lack of separation of duties.
Yeah.
It's very common to see that in governments and small businesses. The county has had that comment for a long time. I will say the separation of duties that you have in the finance department is good, but you have other departments and constitutional offices where you may have one employee, performing incompatible duties. And I do know that we've spoken with Commissioner Morgan and Alicia since the draft of the audit went out, and I know they are looking into each department and each office to see where improvements can be made. And, that doesn't mean that comment may go away, and I always try to let clients know, if you make improvements and the comment is still there, keep in mind you still made improvements. You still made improvements to prevent fraud and error, but it is something that we assess each year as we are in those offices and departments and in the finance department.
And I guess this is not atypical, in your opinion, for a county with our various operations on pages 139 and 140 to have less than the optimal separation of duties and internal controls over cash.
It's actually not unusual in a county. Clay does several counties. I may let him chime in here on his thoughts. And again, the reason is the finance department often has maybe 4 to 6 employees, and there can be separation between receipting money, performing the bank rec, taking it to the bank, but oftentimes the constitutional offices have one person that basically is the accountant per se, and they're not a degreed accountant typically either, but they're usually the accounting person, and they often perform all of the finance functions for that office. Or you may have the elected official performing those themselves. I've seen that as well. Did you have anything to add to that?
I'll chime in here a little bit. So, first of all, yes, sir, that is very common for counties of this size and with even counties larger as well to have those similar segregation of duties issues. But I will also say that Alicia and Commissioner Morgan and I have actually talked in detail about this after the draft went out. They are, and we're actually sending to them, we have these checklists we use that kind of walk through the processes at the various different offices. And so they're going to look at trying to, whether, even though it's not necessarily the finance department, they're going to look at potentially documenting and walking through the processes at some of the various different offices of the county to try to mitigate or work through some of those lack of segregation duties in some of those offices. So
I wonder if IT could help on this, especially with your larger, because you could have an IT process whereby on the front end, somebody independently logs in the cash, and then on the back end, the transaction is handled by a completely different person who is inputting bank deposit records or something. So you could have software that basically does that, and I wonder if our IT department could, or has the expertise to look in and correct this via software versus some other complicated method. I mean, it could be an easy fix, I would think.
yes, sir, I would agree with that completely. And I think whether you want IT to assist with that or not, no matter what in the future, that's where we're going anyway. We're currently looking at segregation of duties. Matter of fact, it's been several years ago, we were required in our auditing standards to look at IT to see, okay, I mean, not so much into what some of those IT folks do, but more so how it affects the finance piece of the audit, I guess you'd say. But everything's moving more and more in that direction, as you all know. So we are going, whether you want to involve IT in helping to segregate, you're going to be required to as we move forward, just simply because that's where the world is moving, is in the direction of IT.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I do think you could probably use assistance there in that regard as far as that's concerned. Just whether or not the cost that goes along with that as far as softwares and that sort of thing is concerned.
Yeah. In addition to your test of controls in that area, did you do any reconciliation as best you could to determine if there was any loss or not, or is that not part of?
As far as IT?
No, as far as the various
Constitutional offices.
funds.
As far as constitutional officers you're talking
Yeah.
about? As far as, when you mean loss, are you referring to?
Well, I just mean, was there any reconciliation of, here's the records that indicate what cash was collected on the front end, here's the back end where we made bank deposits, oops, is there something missing here?
Nothing in regard to anything missing during this fiscal year, for sure.
Yeah.
I think we had maybe a suggestion or two regarding timeliness of deposits, which is where your risk comes in from missing funds, but nothing in regard to actual, in what we sampled, any actual missing funds.
Okay.
Any other questions? This last slide includes our contact information. I know this is a very brief view of everything, a quick oversight. So definitely, as any time of year, not just right after the presentation, feel free to reach out to either one of us, because I know you may have questions you don't know you have yet. So that's our number and our email, and we're available to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate your hard work. All right. We will now have our Financial Director, Alicia Searcy, to review our December financials.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. We'll talk some more numbers here. So at December, we're halfway done. We're halfway through the year, and things are looking good so far. At the end of December, we had $45,913,000 in revenue, so we're at about 77.68% of our budget. In reviewing our revenue, looking forward toward the end of the year, I feel confident that we're going to make our budgeted revenue numbers. So we're in line, we're moving in the right direction and hitting revenue right where we should. Last year we were at about $42 million, which was about 76% of our budget. And our expenditures this year are at $28,136,000. That's 47.6% of our budget. And so we should be at about 50% halfway through the year. We do have some expenses, like some risk management expenses that we paid in full, so being at 47.6 is very good. I think there again, we will come in line with our budget on our expenditures, so we're headed in the right direction to make the budgeted numbers that we set last spring. Our fund balance is at $49,904,000. We're right at the height of our fund balance because we're right at the end of our property tax collections. So you'll see that number continue to go down as we move through the rest of the year. Last year we were at $35,671,000. Our cash balance is at $48,436,000. We're at $35 million last year. We are starting to work on some projects that we set money aside for last year. Our jail barrier project should get underway next month. We've started buying some supplies related to that. IT will probably get busy with buying some switches and other hardware that we set money aside for, getting those things put in place. The Temple Convenience Center's getting ready to get underway. The compactor, I think we've got one of those that came in this week already. We got another one expected by the end of the week, and Public Works is preparing to move equipment up there, so hopefully that convenience center will be redone in a short time with those compactors installed. And our magistrate roof and HVAC replacement is complete, so we've got that done with the money that we set aside there. Any questions?
Ms. Searcy, the report looks good, as you stated. Our net position's looks excellent. I do have a couple line item questions. Under expenditures, the Correctional Institute, looks like we're down about 56 or 57,000 there from prior year to date on expenses.
Yeah, in public safety in general, we're down heads. We're missing people. Just one, due to some sickness, and two, due to the fact that we've got people just leaving public safety. So their wages, we don't have a full staff there. So.
And the economic development assistance, we've got the same budget at 165 from prior year to date. I guess we've just not made an additional payment or something there. I see that number's down.
We've spread those payments out
Okay.
through the year instead of making some larger payments initially.
And on debt service, I'm not showing anything yet year to date on the capital lease.
Our first payment will be due February 1st. That payment was made last week, and I've confirmed receipt with Capital One Public Finance that they received that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions? All right. Thank you, Alicia. We will now review and discuss items for the February 1st, 2022 Board of Commissioners meeting. I call on Chief Deputy Sheriff Brad Robinson to present a consideration for a law enforcement training grant for $14,945.
Thank you, Vice Chairman, Board of Commissioners. I'm Brad Robinson, and while we have been awarded in the past larger grants, every little bit helps. This grant is in the amount of $14,235, and it's basically a training grant awarded to us through CJCC, which is Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. And it's a training grant, and what we're going to use is, I think in your packet you're going to see that there's some Holosun optics. Those optics will be put on the weapons that our special response team carries. They do a lot of training throughout the month. It'll give them a better line of sight if they were to have to use those weapons. Hopefully not, but they continuously train with those, so those will be optics for their weapons. And the other equipment that we'll be purchasing is 2 pepper ball guns. that is essentially what a paintball gun is almost. It almost looks like it, and the features are about the same. You can see the cost there. And the other items there are going to be the inert pepper balls that we use to train the officers on how to use those, and of course the live ammunition. It's pepper ball gas. It keeps the officers out of harm's way. It's another tool in our tool belt for non-lethal force, and we have some already, and they've been very beneficial in several different areas where we have a barricaded suspect or something. We can deploy those pepper balls and usually get the suspects out without having to go inside. So I'm asking that the board grant us permission to purchase these. This is with no matching funds.
Are those like the tasers, you have to be shot with them to use them?
I'm not going to be pepper ball, but back in the day, yeah, to carry that gas, you know,
Shoot Big
the
Richard.
pepper gas, you had to use it, and
Big Richard can handle it.
That's
Shoot
right.
him with it.
What
He's
you're
done
saying
it
is
before.
you do not want that as a stipulation of the approval.
at least for my part, no.
That's funny. Any more questions? Or statements? Gentlemen, are you okay with putting this on a consent agenda?
Thank you.
Brian. Appreciate
Thank
it.
Nobody.
We don't
Oh,
do that with
we-
consent.
We just agree.
Second.
We just agree. I will now call on Brian Kent, County Engineer, to present the timber and pulpwood harvesting ordinance. So, do I need to call for a vote?
I don't think we can vote during the work session.
No.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Correct. Stand correct.
But no, thank you, Jennifer, for keeping me on track.
Thank you, Vice Chair, Commissioners. Before you to accept during the commission, Chapter 38, Article 3 of our current ordinances needs to be updated per House Bill 897. State law has created, or Georgia Forestry has created a website that is now going to allow timber harvesters to go online and give notification to Carroll County. In doing so, the ordinances, as we has been updated. A conversation earlier, our current ordinance, which I don't think you have, it went from essentially a 4-section article to a 13-section article based on Georgia Forestry model ordinance that was presented, and that's what's before you right now that is proposed to be updated. Questions?
There was also a bond included in that, correct? That if-
Always has been.
Yeah.
Nothing has changed as far as the website that now timber harvesters go on, enter it, and we are notified electronically. In 2015, the ordinance was updated to allow for emails. We still receive the emails, and it's still going to be an email, but it's just allowing a little bit more uniformity through all county governments. We are one of 10 governments right now that are active on the Georgia Forestry website. It went active January 18th. From January 18th, there's a 19-month process before it becomes full on. So we are ahead of the game.
I thought, being part of timber harvesting in the past, this stuff, I don't know about the specific bond to Carroll County to repair ditches and that kind of thing, but as far as notification and signage and that kind of thing, it was already required.
We don't, as far as signage in here, we did add a little section in signage. There is no place we could go to in county ordinance and say signs are required. It's always been a best practice. It's one of those Georgia Forestry best management practices. Trucks entering, we always see the trucks entering highway.
Yeah.
GDOT does require that. They have it on, like on Highway 5, they have to require that. We just never had it, and we did add that in our ordinance. That was something that was outside the model ordinance. We did add that, had that conversation. It was just a good time to do that.
Yeah, okay. I just have a couple technical questions. So in one part here, I guess it's the first section, 38-46, where it says prior to entering onto the property, is that confusing at all? I mean, timber operators enter onto the property to do timber cruises before they even start cutting, or sometimes 8 months before they start cutting.
Harvesting process, notification processes, cruising, this has nothing to do with cruising. This is the actual harvesting process.
Okay.
Since 2015, they are supposed to give 24-hour notice before they move on site.
Yeah. Is this prior to entering onto the property? I guess that's what, I mean, I guess we're not talking then about doing a timber cruise or a pre-harvesting conference or something like that. It's actual harvesting of the timber. I don't know if we need to put something prior to entering onto the property for beginning of the timber harvest or something. I don't know. It's just a technicality kind of stuck out to me that it's a little unclear. But and the notice of cessation of cutting within 24 hours, is that reasonable? Or is that changed from what it has been, I guess?
You're asking me a loaded question. Yes, I think it is.
And that's the requirement in the statute.
Yeah, state-
Both of
Okay.
those provisions just track the statute.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. So my only thing would just be, do we want to clarify entering onto the property as beginning a timber harvest? That would be my only question, I guess.
We can look at that. But it tracks the language of
Okay.
the statute, so we may want to keep it consistent, but we'll definitely, I'll get with Brian and we'll look at
Yeah.
that.
I just wouldn't want some overly zealous somebody down the road to say, well, before you do a timber cruise or before you have a pre-harvest conference or something, you have to do all this. Anyway,
It is,
just a point.
this is one of those activities that's very well protected. This is not in any intent to be more restrictive of any sort. This is a very well-protected activity.
Yeah,
So this has no intent of ever being restrictive on that regard.
yeah.
Any more questions? All right, gentlemen. Do you guys want to put this on consent or good?
Yeah, as long as you look at that.
Okay. We'll add this to consent. All right, that is all we have. Meeting is adjourned.